Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. I just want to wish you a Happy New Year. It's January the 2nd. I got a bit of a cold, but I'm going to press on here because this is important. Brian Zilch, who is the editor and owner of Pipeline Online, just issued a report on wind power in Alberta last night. And the title is Zero Zip Zilch, Wind Output in Alberta on January the 2nd. Now, he said that he doesn't like to, sit up all night and follow these numbers, but he just happened to see them dropping last night. So here's what he wrote. Zero Zip Zilch, wind output in Alberta on January the 2nd. In other words, 1 is the loneliest number again. Well, it was until it hit 0. Wind power generation in Alberta and Saskatchewan has seen significant variation in recent days, from producing over half of their respective nameplate capacity to next to nothing. And eventually, it fell to exactly that, nothing. Alberta's wind output at 1:18 in the morning, January 2nd, fell to 0. Zip, zilch, nada. According to data published by the Alberta Electric System Operator, the ISO, and logged by X account Reliable Alberta, at 1:59 p.m. on December 30th, Alberta's wind fleet of 50 wind farms, comprised of 1,760 wind turbines, was producing 3,327 megawatts out of a nameplate capacity of 5,684 megawatts. So that was 58.5% of total wind capacity, making up 27.3% of the province's total generation at the time. Natural gas was accounting for 64.2%, solar was 5.3%, biomass was 2.1%, hydro was 1%. Now, step forward to 9:35 p.m. on January 1st, and wind output was 3 megawatts out of a capacity of 5,684. That's 0.05% of capacity, or less than 1/10 of 1%. So he's got a big long fraction here. I'm not going to read all these numbers. I'm slightly dyslexic, so I don't want to mix it all up. Anyway, it stayed at that level for several minutes and hovered in the single digits for at least 3 hours. At 11:57 p.m., wind was at 5 megawatts. 5. It was minus 14 degrees Celsius in Edmonton and minus 8 degrees Celsius in Calgary. Fort McMurray was minus 25 degrees Celsius, and Grand Prairie was minus 18 Celsius. And by 12:09 a.m. on Friday, January 2nd, 2026, wind output fell to 1 megawatt out of 5,684 and hovered between 1 and 2 megawatts for several minutes. An hour later, wind output hovered at 1 megawatt for at least 10 minutes before it fell to 0 at 1:18 a.m. So then he does some math here, 1 megawatt divided by the total nameplate capacity, and he says that it's 0.0176%, or less than 1/5 of 1/10 of 1% of wind capacity in Alberta. And 0, of course, needs no calculation. It's 0, as in less than an iPhone charger. And at 1:27 a.m., it hit 0 again and stayed there for 5 minutes. It would regain 1 megawatt and then fall to 0 again at 1:36. According to weather site Windycom, at Lethbridge and Pincher Creek in the heart of Alberta's wind generation area, Wind registered at 1 knot at midnight, with gusts of 8 and 4 knots respectively. And being nighttime, solar was producing 0 power. At 1:32 a.m., natural gas was producing 9,906 megawatts of the 10,231 megawatts being produced on the Alberta grid, making up 96.8% of all power generation at that moment. Now he goes on to talk a bit about Saskatchewan. They have a slightly different reporting system there, so we can't make direct comparisons, but he's saying here in Saskatchewan, Sask Power puts out 24-hour averages per generation class once per day on its Where Your Power Comes From webpage. That data is delayed 2 days to protect Sask Power's bargaining position in the wholesale electrical market. So the X account SK Electricity logs that data. On December 30th, wind produced an average 500 megawatts out of a capacity of 817 megawatts, or 61.1% capacity. The previous day, wind produced 503 megawatts as well. As far as wind output goes, over 60% output is generally a good day in Alberta or Saskatchewan. But on December 26th, wind output averaged just 18 megawatts, or 2.2%. That's an average, meaning there were times that the output was higher and lower than 18 megawatts. On that day, natural gas produced 1,780 megawatts, and coal produced 1,018 megawatts, with hydro at 335 megawatts. Again, this is in Saskatchewan. Other was 101 megawatts, and solar was 1 megawatt. That meant natural gas and coal combined produced 86.5% of Saskatchewan's power on Boxing Day. Brian Zilch goes on to say Alberta signed a memorandum of understanding with the federal government which, if carried through, will carve out Alberta from the clean electricity regulations. Those regulations seek to eliminate the burning of fossil fuels for power generation. Saskatchewan, however, is still very much exposed to those regulations. However, Saskatchewan has chosen to ignore the federal coal regulations and the clean electricity regulations, stipulating that electricity generation falls under provincial jurisdiction according to the Constitution. Now, as you can see, I've got just some little toy wind turbines here, and they're not moving. So, people who say that the wind always blows somewhere are mistaken, because regionally the wind just doesn't blow somewhere in a region. It might be blowing on the other side of the province, on the other side of the country, but it's not going to be blowing in Saskatchewan at any rate if it's not blowing in Alberta at any rate. And these clean regulations and this concept of this east-west clean power grid where wind can be simply shuffled by electrons from one end of the country to the other in a timely or cost-effective way, these are ludicrous ideas, very expensive. And you can see by these numbers, if we hadn't have had natural gas power generation in Alberta, Alberta would have been in the dark. And if we don't solve these problems very soon, it's going to get really, really cold for all of us. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.